starting in verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. For each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them. Now going down to chapter 13, verse 21. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin, as far as Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath. And they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well aware and able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Chapter 14, starting in verse 26. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, How long shall I bear with this evil congregation who murmur against me? I have heard the complaints which the children of Israel murmur against me. Say to them, As I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will do to you. The carcasses of you who have complained against me shall fall in this wilderness, all of you who were numbered according to your entire number, from 20 years old and above, except for Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. You shall by no means enter the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. But your little ones, whom you said would be victims, I will bring in, and they shall know the land which they have despised, which you have despised. But as for you, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and bear the brunt of your infidelity, until your carcasses are consumed in the wilderness. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days. For each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years. And you shall know my rejection. I, the Lord, have spoken this. I will surely do so to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be consumed, and there they shall die. If you go to Romans chapter 15, verse 4, Paul said, For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. Very important words. In 1 Corinthians 10, 1 through 12, Paul said, Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So there we have the connection between Jesus and the Old Testament story of Moses and the children in the wilderness. Paul goes on to say, But with most of them God was not well pleased. And we got that from reading Numbers. For their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things became our examples by the intent, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. And do not become idolaters as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Nor let us commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in one day 23,000 fell. Nor let us tempt Christ, as some of them tempted, and were destroyed by serpents. Nor complain, as some of them also complained, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, on whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. No word in any language grabs our attention more and shakes our senses more than that word lost. A child is lost in the woods. The entire community gets involved in the search. We've heard those stories on newscasts for years and years. The Lord knew the terror, the anxiety that people would experience by being lost, and so He told of a lost sheep. He told about a lost coin and a lost boy in Luke 15 to let people see and know that heaven's attitude toward the lost is very serious. He came to seek and save the lost in Luke 19:10. And one of the most tragic accounts in the Bible is that of a lost generation. An entire generation that failed to enter the promised land in the verses that we read in Numbers 13 and 14. And after their long bondage in Egypt, God delivered Israel. He brought them through the Red Sea. He led them to Mount Sinai. He gave them the law. He fed them with manna. He graciously attended to their needs and led them to the promised land. And to reassure them of the promised land of rest, God told Moses to send out 12 spies to inspect the land, to spy out the land, and then give their report. Their mission actually was very simple. Number one, just observe its inhabitants to see if they were strong or weak. Two, to check out its cities to see if they were walled or just made of tents. And then third, examine its soil to see if it's fertile and productive. And they completed their assignment, but they went too far in presenting conclusions that they reached, and then offering recommendations for their action. See, this was not part of their mission. Look at the reports of the spies. The majority report is summed up in Numbers 13, 27 through 37. And as you consider their report, keep in mind that God has promised them this land. The promise has already been made. The minority report was given by Joshua and Caleb, and it concurred with the majority in what they saw. But it did not agree with the conclusions drawn and the recommendations offered by the other 10. Caleb and Joshua had seen the obstacles which had been reported, and yet they urged Israel, with the help of God, to go up and possess the land. Chapter 13, verse 30. Now, why did their reports differ? Both sides had seen the same land, the same cities, the same obstacles. What's the difference? While both saw the same picture, the majority failed to see the most important element. What's that? God. The picture's always brighter if we include God, what He can and will do. Paul said in Philippians chapter 4, verse 13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. The Hebrew writer said in chapter 13, verse 6, so we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear. What can man do to me? Why was this generation in the wilderness lost? There are a number of reasons. Number one, they drew back. Look at chapter 14 in Numbers 26 through 35, and it says that when they refused to go up to possess the land, God withdrew His promise. He declared they would not enter in until all those who had murmured had died in the wilderness. They would wander in the wilderness a year for each day that they had spied out the land. And the same will happen to us if we draw back. Hebrews 10, 35 through 39 says, therefore do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. For yet a little while, and he who is coming will come and will not tarry. Now the just shall live by faith. But if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, he says, but of those who believe in the saving of the soul. Another characteristic is that they were satisfied with the majority report. They rejected the minority report of Joshua and Caleb without consideration or investigation. In Exodus 23, verse 2, you shall not follow a crowd to do evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. Another characteristic is they became angry at the opposition. The majority got mad at the minority. Numbers 14:10. But the whole assembly talked about stoning Joshua and Caleb. It's dangerous to blindly follow the crowd because so often the majority is wrong and the minority is right. Noah was a small minority. He and his family, 8 people against the world. Elijah stood alone against 450 false prophets of Baal, but he was right. Barabbas got more votes than Jesus, but Barabbas was guilty and Jesus was innocent. Another characteristic is that they magnified their difficulties. Well, we're good at that, aren't we? All they could focus on was the trials, the giants, the hard work. They closed their eyes, they closed their minds to the blessings and the opportunities that God had promised, and they closed their hearts to God's faithfulness to them. They saw giants and walled cities, but they forgot God and His providence. The Apostle Paul had a thorn in the flesh, but he forgot his thorn in the flesh because of the assurance he received from the Lord in 2 Corinthians 12:7-9. With every difficulty, God makes provisions for His own. Romans 8, verse 31, one of my favorite chapters. It says there, if God is for us, who can be against us? Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Hebrews 13:6, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Another characteristic is that they did not respect themselves. They were like grasshoppers in our sight, they said. Looking at those giants, who are we compared to them? They should have remembered. They numbered 603,500 warriors who had never been defeated. The same God who delivered them from Egypt was still with them. The traits of self-denial and humility are not signs of weakness when you place yourself in God's hands. In fact, self-denial and humility are mandatory if you belong to God. And don't ever resent what God has given you. Don't belittle your worth. 1 John chapter 3, verses 1 and 2 say, behold what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God. Therefore the world does not know us, because it did not know Him. Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be. But we know that when He is revealed, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. Another characteristic is that they murmured and turned from authority. They planned an insurrection against Moses and Aaron, and then against God. And their constant whining and bickering provoked the Lord in chapter 14, verses 11 and 12. They offered nothing constructive. They loudly criticized anything offered to better their situation. And then, another characteristic, they were looking back and not ahead. This again is a problem that we often have. They turned their attention back to Egypt. They remembered the experiences of yesterday, but they didn't look with anticipation of what lay ahead. It's interesting, isn't it, how when we look back, we don't remember things as bad as they really were. But God's people must look to the future. In Luke 9:62, but Jesus said to him, "No one having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God." And Paul said in Colossians 3:1 and 2, "Seek those things which are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth." Now, the last characteristic I want to mention is that they were unwilling to pay the price. To them, the price was too high. And maybe they had gotten soft from all the free stuff that God was giving them. The free protection, the free manna, the free quail, the sweet water, and on and on and on. We must be willing to meet the demands of God. Again, in Luke chapter 9, verse 23, Jesus said, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." We must count the cost, but we must be willing to pay the price. In Luke 14, starting in verse 27, "And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Lest, after he has laid the foundation and is unable to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going to make war against another king, does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace." Then Jesus said, "So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple." And then back to Romans 8, verse 18. Paul said, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us." It's sad. It's pathetic that an entire generation was lost. Well, what about today? We need to apply the lessons to ourselves. And that comes from Romans 15:4 and 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. We have the same situations today. If we're talking about the majority in the world and the minority that's in Christ, we must not be unmindful of the warnings given to us. And I'll end with Hebrews chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. Let this be an encouragement to you, an admonition to you. "Therefore, since a promise remains of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. For indeed the gospel was preached to us as well as to them. But the word which they heard did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in those who heard it." Think about these lessons today. Are we living in a lost generation? That's up to the children of God to stand up, even when they're in the minority, for what's right, and not be lost, not let the world drag us down to their level. Thank you for listening today, for sharing in this devotion. I hope that it's meaningful to you, and I hope it helps you in your Christian walk.